Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this video. It's a pleasure to have you again. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is inheritance of your crypto, especially Bitcoin. Like what happens when you die, and how can you protect your crypto from not just disappearing after your death, and how do you pass it on to your beloved ones. So let's dive into it and let's start why Bitcoin inheritance is so important. If Bitcoin is held in self-custody, there's nobody who can move funds without access to the private keys. This is how Bitcoin works by design, so if inheritance is not set up properly, there's a very high chance that your Bitcoin will get lost and nobody will actually receive it after you passing away. And even if your relatives come across your seed phrase or backup keys after you're passed away, will they know what to do with it, or will they even know what it is? It is dangerous to leave your Bitcoin inheritance up to chance, but it can be equally risky to just simply tell your relatives exactly how to access your Bitcoin belongings. So let's dive into some risks that are associated with sharing your access before you're dead. And the first one is very simple. If people know how to access your funds, their physical and digital safety can be put at risk, as others might try to get this information out of them. A second one is inexperience. Even with the best documentations, a family member could enter a seed phrase wrong, or they could enter it in a compromised software, lose access. They could ask help from outside that might not be reliable. So inexperience can obviously be a bit of a problem, especially if the relative is not super technical. Another thing is if the owner does not have a will, then the beneficiary could take the Bitcoin for themselves without sharing it with the other relatives, and it can pretend that the Bitcoin has just been lost, basically stealing the Bitcoin. A premature access can also be a risk for both parties. While the owner is alive and well, beneficiaries could take a curious look just to see how much Bitcoin there is, or if the amount has changed over time, and mess something up in the process. In the case of theft, who is to blame? If a third party steals your Bitcoin, the beneficiary, like your children, could be a suspect. Not necessarily for taking the Bitcoin, but perhaps for, let's say, poorly securing it, all while they just may be innocent. So let's take a look at some options on how you can secure your Bitcoin in your inheritance. Here you see a chart with 3 different options. You have option 1, where you rely on a third-party custodian to secure your Bitcoin. You have option 2, where you do some kind of collaborative custody with a third party, like a company, and the beneficiary, like your relative that you want to pass your Bitcoin on. And then you have a third option where you just have full custody of your Bitcoin and you just write down the seed phrases and you just pass it along before you're dead. So let's discuss these options in a bit more details. So with option 1, you hold the Bitcoin at a custodian with beneficiary setup. So you basically pay a company a fee to arrange everything after you pass away, and they will also store your Bitcoin. So for this option, where a company must be trusted to hold your Bitcoin, I can imagine that this is skeptical for some people, or some people would be skeptical about this. So if the company makes a mistake with their cold storage funds, your Bitcoin may just be lost forever. And similar to banks and investment funds, it can take years, if not decades, to build a trust for people to actually invest in such companies. However, one of the main appeals is that it does not involve any responsibility on behalf of beneficiaries to protect a private key. They can simply contact the company, prove that the person was deceased, and just inherit the Bitcoin. A second option is where the Bitcoin is held in a multisig in collaboration with a third-party service. So this option is a bit more closer to self-custody, and multisig or multi-signature enables the Bitcoin to be secured in a setup that requires a specific numbers of keys to move it. For example, 2 out of the 3 keys must sign a transaction in order to make it happen. So in this setup, the owner holds the key, the beneficiary holds another key, and then the third key is held by a service provider. If the owner passes away, the beneficiary and the service provider would together be able to move the Bitcoin to a new address. The second thing is that there's no premature access allowed, so as long as the person is still alive, the beneficiary cannot just move the Bitcoin without permission of the service provider, and it would not provide that permission as long as the owner is still alive. Another benefit of this option is that it's very hard to steal the Bitcoin, as you need 2 out of the 3 keys. Like if you steal one, you still need a second one in order to access the Bitcoin. With option 3, we choose to not trust any third parties. This option seems to be the most appealing because you don't need to pay any fees to third-party companies. In practice, however, this option can be considered the highest risk of losing your funds, as many things can go wrong here. You could try to create a multisig setup yourself, where the other beneficiaries are just holding the keys, like your brother or sister, and then one other key is being held by your parents. But just keep in mind that sometimes these setups rely on specific pieces of software that may not continue to function after your death. Like if a few years pass by and maybe the software just doesn't exist at all anymore or is not supported, something happens and they can't get access to your Bitcoin. Also, the beneficiaries, like your parents or siblings, they need to have the technical know-how on how to access and use and operate the software. If they don't, then they might need to ask for external help, which by its turn might not always be reliable. There are some ways in improving self-custodian Bitcoin inheritance options. So for example, to avoid premature access risk, people have restricted the ability to move their Bitcoin through Bitcoin's built-in time lock feature. So this is a script that ensures the transaction with the funds is only sent once the number of Bitcoin blocks have been mined. There is some risk because if this time lock is misconfigured, the Bitcoin could be lost forever. There's also no way knowing what future fees will be. To finalize, I also want to express the importance of checking if you have to pay taxes on your Bitcoin inheritance. It all depends on the country you live in and whether Bitcoin is considered a property and a whole bunch of other variables. In the US, for example, it's possible that you have to pay federal and state taxes. So it's always wise to consult an expert or someone that knows the rules around crypto or Bitcoin taxes when it comes to these issues, these inherited issues. So to conclude this video, there are many ways where things can go wrong when it comes to Bitcoin or crypto inheritance. So make sure that you always do your due diligence and proper research. And yeah, each of these options have their pros and cons. And no matter what approach you stick with, setting up a will in addition of any of these options is always highly recommended. So to avoid any arguments or uncomfortable situations after your passing. Again, always consult a professional, can't harm, and it's better than lose everything. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. If so, leave a like and a comment, and I see you in the next one. Cheers.